Okay, good morning, everybody, or afternoon, depending on your location across the country. Welcome to our September Tech Talks. Today, we're going to be talking about sealants and some of the changes to the VOC rules, as well as a wide range of other topics and conversation about the importance of sealants, how to work with them, etc. Today we have Marcy Tyler. She's the Director of Building Science for Tremco Commercial Sealants and Waterproofing Division, part of the Tremco Construction Products Group. She's worked in the commercial construction market for more than 15 years with a focus on building enclosure, been at hundreds of job sites, troubleshooting, training, and providing product and system support. Marcy enjoys engaging with industry organizations, providing thought leadership centered around documented system performance for the entire building enclosure. I just want to say thanks to Marcy and Wade. Wade unfortunately had a conflict, so he couldn't join us today from Tremco. But Tremco has been a great partner with FenCan, and we're really happy to have him here to tell us all about sealants. We've also got Jeff Makamoto, the Fenestration Canada commercial technical consultant. He's having some technical issues, ironically.
Ironically.
But hopefully he'll be able to join us here shortly. We're going to hold the questions to the end if we could. So just put your hand up when we get to the end, and I'll either read them off or bring you in for conversation. So Marcy, take it away.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for your time and attention today. When you think about performance and you think about what a sealant, which is our topic today, has to do, it has a big role to play. And so, all kidding aside, what you're seeing on screen right now talks about going above and beyond code. And what that really means to us as a manufacturer is we're trying to think ahead of what we can do to evaluate, test, look at different conditions that these products and these systems are going to be exposed to. And so that's really what we look at when we think about above and beyond, what's required of that system. In this picture, that is actually a self-adhered membrane that we have available, and it has a butyl backing. And I used to say, the adhesion is so strong, it would probably hold me to the wall, kind of like that commercial from a long time ago, with the crazy glue and the guy in the hard hat. And that's what that picture's all about. So once again, all kidding aside, we really are trying to look at how do we evaluate these products so that we get it to a real world evaluation, so that when you guys are installing them and you guys are using them and you have them on your projects, on your home, whatever it might be, that you have confidence that it's going to be able to do what it needs to do for the life of the installation, or the expectancy of life of that installation. So that's what that's all about. Interesting enough, sealants is something we talk about all the time as a manufacturer. So I work for Tremco Commercial Sealants and Waterproofing, part of the Construction Products Group. Our biggest topic for continuing education is sealants. So once again, if that's of interest, if you guys want to know more, if you want to bring this to your friends, your colleagues, whatever it might be, we'd be happy to do that. But today we wanted to talk about sealants and something that's coming up here very quickly, right? It'll be here before we know it. January 1st, 2024, there is VOC limit changes that are put out by the government of Canada. So what that is doing is it's changing the VOC regulations for an acoustical sealant to be a 10 weight percent. And then for anything that is to fill, seal, waterproof or weatherproof a gap or a joint of two different surfaces, that VOC limit is now going to be 4 weight percent. So that is something we all need to consider and look at. So if there's a sealant out there that you're used to using, as a manufacturer, we've been, very behind the scenes working on this to make sure we got something that was compliant. So if you have questions about that, there's a lot of great information we can share from the government, from your government itself, or give us a call. We'd love to be able to talk to you about it. We have this letter as well as this compliant sheet, if you're interested, that goes through all the different sealants that will continue to be compliant after this regulation goes into effect on January 1st, 2024. So Terry, that's coming here before you know it. I can't believe it's already September. And October will be here before we know it. So we wanted to be able to share this and a lot of other things related to sealants, right? So if you think about a sealant itself, not only do we have to make sure it meets the requirements from a VOC, so that's the volatile content of that article or that sealant in this case, we also got to make sure it can do a lot of other things. And that's why we wanted to bring to you some information about a VOC compliant product in addition to all those other ones that were listed there. This is something that a lot of you as users of sealant might be very familiar with it and love using it. So it has been for a long time Tremco 830. The VOC compliant version will be 830 plus. So that'll be coming to you and made available in November. So lots of great uses for this product. You're going to find it very similar to the uses, the installation, the handling that you saw with the original version of Tremco 830. It just is VOC compliant now. So really cool color palette, which is great. So we can do different types of color matching, but it actually is a true clear, which is pretty unique as well. Self-tooling is probably something we could have a whole tech talk about, right, Terry? But what we talk about there is a lot of people like to apply this sealant and it's a very clean application. So there is not a lot of touching and tooling that is needed from it. It can be painted, it's super flexible, exterior applications, excellent UV stability. And we've done a lot of adhesion testing. Some of those common substrates are listed there, but we like to say, if you have a specific substrate, let us, do an adhesion test for you, whether it's a field adhesion test or something we do in the lab, or give you a recommendation based on some of the past testing we've already done. So we always want to get involved as much as possible. So that's that sealant. When we think about sealants in general, what we want to talk to you about is a couple other things you need to consider, right? So not only with this sealant, but any sealant that you're using, how do you choose what sealant you're going to use? Because it has a big role to play on your project, on your home, on your trailer, whatever it might be, right? We don't want to take the time, the effort and energy to install something that's not going to be able to perform as it needs to, right? There's a lot of great products out there. We just got to make sure we're using it appropriately. Sealants themselves can do a lot, right? They can protect whatever that might be from getting air and water getting into it, right? So if it's the perimeter of a window, if it's the perimeter of a parking garage, whatever it might be, that it's meant to be installed to stop that flow of air and water. Installing anything in a gap or a void can provide some level of thermal advantages, sound dampening, right? If air can't transfer through, there won't be the vibrations that cause sound. A lot of sealants are used in fire stopping applications. So that is just something else where it can be used. Obviously, dynamic joints where you see things of movement. Now you're going to want to look at what type of movement that sealant has. And we'll get into all that today while we're talking. And really, if you think about it, sealants are used in so many different ways from a transition perspective, a horizontal to a vertical, a window jamb, window door to a wall, any type of application where it's filling a gap or a void for detailing. And it can provide aesthetics, right? So it can be color matched, right? We can do a variety of different things so that it really blends into where it's being installed. So a couple pictures there associated with it. As I mentioned, this is the biggest topic, the most requested continuing education course we have. So we can go into really great depths talking about sealants, believe it or not. So if you are interested, we certainly can help you out with that. But we wanted to let you know a couple other things when we think about a sealant. So before it ever even shows up on a shelf, before it is ever even something that you're able to use, it has a big journey that it goes through, right? There's a variety of different physical properties that we're continuing to evaluate. We're looking at its hardness, right? So is it really soft and doesn't need to be soft for your application, or do you want it to be really hard so that it can handle high point loads? How well does it stretch and move and bond to different substrates? How quickly does it set up? One of my favorite field trials that I did was at Disney, and they wanted a sealant that could be installed at night. And it was good to go in the morning when the park opened up, right? So there was some specific physical properties that were needed from that sealant to be able to achieve that goal. And that's where we get into understanding exactly what your intended use is. We also do a variety of field trials before we launch a product, right? The condition up in Vancouver is going to be different than in the middle of the country, right? Where you have different levels of humidity, different temperature extremes, right? So we have to do a lot of different field trials in a lot of different conditions. Think about hot and cold climates, high humidity, low humidity. All of those things are things we need to look at and factor in when we think about regional practices, regional requirements like the VOC limitations, right? And even just handling, right? Do you want to make sure that this has to stay warm before you install it? Is it something that can freeze? So you need to keep it in a truck that can't allow for that. So those are all things we consider. And each sealant will give you those types of recommendations, either the physical properties associated with it and also the limitations associated with it. And once again, we look at temperature, humidity, UV, weather, and a variety of different substrates. And that's why I chose the two pictures that are on this slide to give you an example of when we're looking at a sealant, we're looking at all these different conditions, all these different physical properties, how it's going to be installed in all these different climatic conditions, and a variety of different substrates. And is that substrate wet? Is that substrate dry? Is it going to be applied onto a different sealant or a different coating or a different type of technology? So lots going on here, not meant to be a horror story by any means, but that's where you can utilize someone like myself or someone like Wade Curry to give you that guidance for wherever it is you're utilizing that sealant. So this next slide, just answer some more questions, right? So if you were standing there trying to decide what sealant you were going to choose and what chemistry, we'll get into that. But, we start off with, is there a specification for your project, right? Is this a commercial construction project where in the specification, it lists exactly what type of technology you need? So that would be the first question. If that's not the case, then we're going to ask you about the application. Is this a perimeter joint sealant? Is this something that's going to be installed in the winter? Is it something that's going to be installed in the summer? Is it something that's going to be installed on metal or porous stone or painted metal, etc.? So these are just a variety of those questions that we would go through to help get you to that specific sealant that's going to work best for your application. Some of these other things, like what kind of surface prep is needed, we're always going to want something that's clean and dry and free of any type of debris, because when you're applying a sealant, it's only going to bond as well to whatever that condition is, right? So if there's a lot of dirt in your joint or in this application, it's going to stick to that dirt and not perform long term. Another question we get quite often is, can it accept paint? So maybe you're going to put a wall coating over it. Maybe you're going to do some sort of membrane or coating after you do this detailing sealant. So that's going to be something really important to understand. What kind of expectations is it associated in terms of life expectancy or maintenance, color? And another one there is, if this is a recaulk, how well do we need to clean that surface prior to installing the next sealant? And we'll get into a lot of these considerations as we continue through this presentation. Before we do that, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit further about something that kind of helps us level the playing field when we look at different sealants. ASTM C920 is the standard specification for elastomeric joint sealants. This might be super familiar to you. If it isn't, we wanted to make sure you knew that this existed. And if you look on technical data sheets, it'll give you some of this criteria to help you kind of, once again, choose the right sealant for your application. What's important to note that is in this literature is that not all sealants meeting the specification are suitable for all applications and all substrates. We kind of talked about that already, and we'll continue to talk about that. We can't take a certain sealant and just assume it's going to work everywhere. In some cases, there are some pretty cool universal sealants that can be used in lots of applications, but you're going to want to be cautious about that so that it can perform. This classification or this specification helps us understand things like type and grade and class, which we'll talk about. It helps us, once again, with that intended end use of where that sealant is going to be used. There are some test methods associated with what we call standard substrates. And in our lab, we'll have these little standard substrates, right? So it'll be a piece of mortar a piece of glass, a piece of aluminum. But on your job site, on your project, on your home, you might have a specific substrate that isn't handled in this. That's kind of considered other or O, and that's okay. But that's where it gets into us doing specific testing for you, or there's a field adhesion test that you can do to validate that this is going to bond as it needs to for performance. And then last but not least, the criteria is listed here. Type is just, is it a single component or multi-component? So is it something that's in a tube ready to go, or do you have to mix it? That would be your multi-component, or M. Grade is pourable or self-leveling with the P. If it's NS, it's non-sag or it's gunnable. So if you're doing any type of vertical joint, you're not going to want to use a P, a grade P product, right? Because it's going to self-level right out of that joint. Class gets into movement. So you've got class 100, so that's plus 100. So 100% extension, 50% compression. Class 50 is plus or minus. So it's extension 50, compression 50, and so on. And you can see those classifications. The lower the number, the less amount of movement capability that these products can perform. Most things, though, to keep in mind when we're looking at a sealant choice for applications, we're looking at a 25 is usually what we're looking at. So 25, a class 25 is a pretty universal sealant that can be used in lots of applications. When you go above 25, it gives you a safety factor. Maybe that's where you have very dissimilar materials coming together. Dissimilar materials are going to have different amounts of thermal movement, right? So that's where those dissimilar materials, more movement characteristics, where you're going to want to maybe grab something that has those higher movement capabilities. But once again, we can help you with that. We have a variety of different resources associated with that. But typically, that class 25 is going to be that universal sealant that can be used in lots of different places. When we look at use, that's when we're starting to look at traffic or non-traffic. If you're looking at traffic, it's simply something that has a hardness or a Shore value that's going to be high enough to withstand point load. Non-traffic would be those applications where you don't need that. Masonry, glass, aluminum, etc. So those are just more ways that we can classify sealants and help us kind of go through that process of choosing the appropriate sealant. Okay. Keep going through here. So we already mentioned today that Tremco 830 Plus. So I just thought I'd reiterate that here for you all to kind of see what that actually means when we look at a sealant. So the Tremco 830 Plus is a type S, so it's a single component. It's a non-sag class 25, so it has that plus or minus 25% movement. It is approved for traffic and non-traffic applications, and we tested it to aluminum and O for other. Lots of substrates, so we usually can list a lot of them here. Okay. Next up is just comparing different technologies. And this is where I don't want to say the complexity gets bigger, but it does get a little more complex, right? So not only are we looking at the performance criteria, the movement, adhesion, things like that, there's different technologies, right? Different chemistries. We have silicones, and you can see them across the board. Typically, silicones tend to be perceived as something that is just a go-to for everything. And it's a great product. It has high UV resistance, high temperature resistance. But the unique thing about silicones is that the only thing that'll bond to a silicone is another silicone. So that's a little limiting if you think about putting up a silicone sealant on your home around every perimeter joint, and then you want to put a wall coating over it or paint over it. You'd have to use a silicone wall painting. You couldn't use an acrylic or some other technology. So that's just something to consider. Polyurethanes, once again, they are really great to be coated over. Same thing with hybrids and acrylics. But we're going to start to look at varying exposure levels now. Polyurethanes tend to have pretty good temperature resistance and UV resistance, but they're not going to have the same resistance as a silicone. Hybrids are something that mixes different technologies together. So they can kind of be a little bit of each of these products depending on what's blended with them. So I always like to say verify with that material data sheet on what kind of temperature UV resistance it has. Acrylics must be coated over. We like to see an acrylic sealant, a lot of internal applications, but we do like to have that coated over and protected in some way. And then butyls, if we're just talking sealants, tend to be that non-skinning, very low movement, more of a lap joint between metals, things like that. And they can't be exposed either. So that just kind of gives you kind of an overall view, but we're going to get into these things a little bit further. If we look again at Tremco 830, it can be coated over and it has great UV resistance. So it's kind of in the middle of the road there between a silicone and a polyurethane. You're still going to, if you think about the high temperature, it's still going to be a silicone that's going to be your best bet for high temperature. And we'll get into that in these next couple of slides. Now, this is kind of a general rule of thumb, and I always like to provide it because when you, once again, look at these technologies, you've got lots and lots of options. So if we look at something like water immersion or any type of immersion, acrylics and butyls are going to be red. Don't go there. Hybrids and silicones, you might have the capability. I'd refer to the technical data sheet, but polyurethanes tend to be the go-to for any type of immersion. Now, if you get into any kind of chlorinated situation, you're going to want to once again verify that with the technical data sheet. Any type of chemicals, we need to verify that as well. If we get into further criteria like installation in hot temperatures, you're always going to get that silicones to be the best. Acrylics can be great too. We tend to see silicones and acrylics and polyurethanes and some hybrids and fire stopping applications. The yellow means verify. And then last but not least, temperatures when it's cold. Which ones are we going to be using most? This is if I'm out in the cold, I'm installing them. Each of these products can handle a certain level of cold temperature installations. We want to make sure we're not applying anything when there's frost present because that's going to affect adhesion. But silicones just tend to be the one that's easier to use in the cold. Okay. But, you know, a lot of these can be used. We just want to make sure we verify installation preferences and things like that. We go back to thinking about the Tremco 830. We do not want it for immersion. It can handle higher temperatures, typical high temperatures, but if you're going really hot, you're going to a silicone, and it can be installed in 20F or -7C from an installation perspective for cold. Okay. The next thing we wanted to talk about, which we know is pretty common, is adhesion and compatibility. Now, when we are asked about adhesion, we bring up compatibility. When we're asked about compatibility, we bring up adhesion because you want to always know both. Okay, so if I'm choosing a sealant, no matter what that application is, I'm going to want to know that it can adhere, right? And I'm also going to want to know if it's compatible with the adjacent materials. So those are things that are super important. We always want to know both. The answer to both of those questions, okay? So if you think just about adhesion, whether it's a sealant or a membrane or a coating, there's a variety of different ways that we can verify them. We do it in the lab. You can see some lab photos there, but then we also want to do it out in the field. Coatings, membranes, same thing, right? There's different means and methods to validate adhesion in the field. And we can help you out with what's required for each type of situation. But if we just look at that middle picture, that is a sealant field adhesion test. And we've got a low modulus silicone. That means it can stretch really well. And it had excellent adhesion to both the brick and metal. So this is a situation, right? It's not just to the brick. It's not just to the metal. It's between both. So in that instance, you're going to want something that can handle the movement of the brick and the movement of the metal. Metal's going to move a lot more from a thermal property perspective than brick. So you're going to get an even level of movement. But we need to make sure we have something that can bond well to both of those substrates. And in this case, it just happened to be a low modulus silicone sealant. It had great adhesion to both brick and metal. So lots of other products might be able to do that as well. That was just one example of what we can show you in terms of doing that field adhesion test. That what you can see, there's a little a sealant bead there. You essentially cut it on both sides and you're going to pull on it. And you're going to see how easy it is for you to pull that out. And how far it can stretch at the same time. So if it can stretch really far, but and then pull away from your sealant, there's levels of acceptance there. You don't want to very easily pull it out, right? Because then it's not going to give you any resistance when there's movement. We can certainly talk more about that. Compatibility is something else. In these pictures, a silicone sealant is what you can see there underneath the black membrane. A silicone sealant was used underneath for all the detailing before this black membrane was applied. The black membrane, that silicone sealant, they actually are compatible. But early on, I mentioned the only thing that'll adhere to a silicone is another silicone. So in this case, the silicone sealant was done beautifully. They applied it on each board joint. They did excellent detailing, but as soon as they put the asphaltic membrane over the top, it didn't bond. So there was not a compatibility issue, but there was an adhesion issue. So that's why we always want to look at both. Once again, we can help you out with this. We can show you past testing. We can do this type of testing. Here is just another example of some of the things we can do. This is an AMA test that looks at the compatibility of a sealant in the wet, uncured, dry, in a wet state with a peel and stick over the top of it. And then it's put in a elevated temperature. So what we're trying to do is validate if those two materials together are compatible. So just one way that we can look at it. In this case, these are 3 different types of polyurethane sealants with 3 different types of results. So that's why we don't even like to kind of bucket them into one bucket. We want to make sure that we understand the overall compatibility regardless of technology. So it's very important to look at that specific product with that next specific product when they're coming in close proximity or adhering to each other and whether they're going to be effective. So lots of things we can do and help out as it relates to that, but it is something to consider and should be in a project specification. This picture here is a situation where we had a peel and stick, a rubberized asphalt peel and stick in the window, right? So it wrapped inside that rough opening before the window was installed. This internal sealant bead was put in place, and the edge of the rubberized asphalt is touching the acrylic sealant. It's changing the color of that acrylic sealant. It's causing staining on the interior side. Compatibility, it's not really affecting that acrylic sealant's ability to perform, but it's not aesthetically pleasing. So once again, that's kind of an interesting situation. The acrylic sealant's adhering fine. It's not performing. It just doesn't, it's not aesthetically pleasing because it's being stained by what's below it. So that's just something else to consider. In this case, you'd have to cut out and recaulk because the owner was not happy with what this is going to look like. So another thing to consider, right? If we have something like structural glazing, that takes it to a whole new level of compatibility. When we think about structural glazing, that sealant is actually holding glass in place, and it might be a couple stories up in a building. We want to make sure that there's nothing going on there. We want to make sure that everything's compatible and things are adhering and there's no issue. We want to make sure that whatever is in close proximity of something like a structural silicone is compatible. We actually have specific tests associated with that we'd love to tell you about more if you are working on a project like that. And then this is just another picture to be thought-provoking, but you've got a lot of different products coming together in just a little window, right? And if there's 8 windows or 100 windows or 1,000 windows, you've got this condition happening multiple times, right? So lots of different products that have different performance demands on them. And are they compatible? Are they adhering to each other? Important to understand. A general rule of thumb, if I am the sealant manufacturer and I'm applying a product onto something else, I'm there to verify adhesion. Okay, so I will verify. I'm last to go. If I'm applying my product on brick, if I'm applying my product on metal, if I'm applying my product on another manufactured material, membrane, coating, etc., I still want to verify adhesion. But both of us should validate and comment on compatibility. Something we both should own. We won't know exactly what is the chemical makeup beyond a material safety data sheet of what that other material is. And that's why it helps to have both people come to the table and comment on compatibility. Okay. So adhesion, whoever comes last, compatibility, we both want to play a part in that. Okay. Couple more things we want to talk about. We talked a lot about adhesion already. If we compare the technologies again, all of these materials have a level of flowable characteristics to them. They tend to bond very well to a lot of different substrates. So they all get a green light when it comes to that. I put a yellow for acrylic just because it can be a little sensitive to certain substrates. They tend to be water-based, so there can be some additional issues that we're looking at there. But we would still want to field adhesion test these, okay, into that condition or that specific material to know how well it's going to bond. What about if we're applying them onto the cured surface? So now we're saying other materials are adhering to these materials. Um, Polyurethanes tend to be the most what we consider neighbor friendly. It will bond, membranes bond well to it, other sealants bond well to it. Acrylics and butyls, I would check with those specifically. Hybrids we've seen can have some weird incompatibility situations. And then silicones, it's got a red light because the only thing that bonds to a silicone is another silicone. So that's why it gets red for other materials, but a green light if it's a silicone. And last but not least on this slide here, compatibility. I give yellow for all of those, just because it might be individual, it might be specific to the volatile content or what solvents are used. So we're going to want to look at those materials. We're going to want to validate those so that we feel comfortable about compatibility. If we look back again at our Tremco 830 that we're excited about bringing out to you in November, it has excellent adhesion to many, many different substrates. It does accept paint, so things can bond to that surface, but we'd want to talk about compatibility with you. Okay, coming here, getting a little more complicated when we think about sealants, but really what this slide here is just meant to demonstrate is the ability of a material to stretch and move, right? So if you think about a rubber band, if you're looking at a thick rubber band, it might be a little harder to pull. A thin rubber band might be much easier to pull. That's essentially what modulus of elasticity is talking about here. When we look at different chemistries and different sealants, they're going to have different levels of ability to stretch, and then also what kind of force it puts on where it's bonding. And really the major takeaway here is if you're worried about a substrate, and its ability to bond, the general rule of thumb is something that's very low modulus isn't going to put a lot of stress on your bonding surfaces. So when movement occurs, it's just going to be more forgiving. That's the general rule of thumb when we think about modulus. We also look at hardness, right? We talked about point loading. So this is something else you're going to look at on your data sheet when you're choosing a product. Do you want it to be really soft, or do you want it to have some sort of resistance, right? There is such a thing as called a pick-proof sealant, right? Maybe in a school or some sort of institution, you're going to want something that people can't pick at and pick away. That's where you're going to look at a hardness test. Point loading of a horizontal walking area might be something else where you're going to verify that hardness of that sealant, something else we look at. We also get into lots of different movement tests, exposures. We could talk about just this probably for an hour. I just put that out there once again because there's a variety of different things we look at when we think about that overall movement and performance. What you see here right now is a specific ASTM test. It's ASTM C719, which is a cyclic movement test, which is part of your ASTM C920, which I mentioned, which gives you the class, right? So that's that ability of that sealant to move certain percentage of extension and a certain amount of compression. If you look closely here, it's two different substrates, or in some cases the same substrate. Maybe some are primed or unprimed. So we are looking at that ability of that sealant to stay bonded and work in an extension and compression, and we cycle that. The bottom picture on the left-hand side, you can see that it's starting to break away. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at what level of movement do we start to see some mode of failure, okay? And then, of course, there's other tests that we could get into and talk about. This is one of those low modulus sealants. We have it in an Instron, and it is stretched over 800%. So that's, once again, demonstrating that elongation, that ability of this product to stretch really far without breaking. If we had a high modulus material, it may have broke at like 200% extension. So just something else to consider, something that we have in our back pocket when we're helping you choose the right product for the right application. Staining is something we didn't get into other than talking about some sealants that get stained, but this was something we saw a lot happening on different types of porous materials, and you still might see it on buildings today. If I've gotten into your head and you're going to start looking at sealants everywhere, like I certainly do, you might notice what we call this hydrophobic blooming that occurs around a sealant. And essentially what that is that there's fluid within the sealant that can migrate into porous substrates and cause this kind of blooming effect on different porous substrates. There is a specific test that we can do, but there's been a lot of innovation around these materials as well. This is another topic we could probably talk about for an hour, but it goes back into the absorbency ranges of different porosity of different porous materials. But as I mentioned, there has been a lot of advancements in different materials to have larger molecular weights so that they don't go into those pores as readily. And even something like the polarity on the sealant surface has been reduced. But if you're interested in knowing more about it, there is a specific test associated with staining. It's ASTM C1248. We do that as a service. So whatever sealant you're choosing from our portfolio, we can actually run this test. It takes about 2 months because you're really going to compress these sealants in the actual substrate from your project. And we're going to put it under different levels of heat and UV, as I mentioned, and compression to really try to force that issue to happen so that we can say it did not happen or it did happen and this is what you're going to need to do. And just to kind of round out what we just got done talking about, we didn't really get into sound transmission, but each of these products are going to provide some level of sound transmission, but there is a specific test. So if you are required in your specification to have a certain sound transmission rating, you're going to want to get that specifically tested for it. But all of these products, if they're filling a gap or a void, it's going to stop the airflow, it's going to stop certain vibrations and give you some sort of level of sound transmission. I've seen all of these used in specific tests for sound transmission. If we look at movement, you can see that we've got silicones, polyurethanes, hybrids tend to be that higher movement products that are going to be that plus or minus 25% or greater. Acrylics tend to be about 12% or less, and butyls even less. So when you're looking at movement, that sweet spot is 25% for most applications. If you need to go beyond that, it's dissimilar surfaces or maybe sensitive substrates. We're going to want to go to a different technology to help with that has that higher movement capability. And then last but not least, this is similar to compatibility. Staining is something we're going to want to look at. We're going to want to verify if you have different levels of porous materials that you're concerned about. Excuse me. And if you look at Tremco 830, it's got that plus or minus 25, so it's got good movement capability. We did run ASTM C510, which is a different stain test. We did not see any staining or color change on that, but we would be able to validate different materials for you if need be. And this kind of rounds off what we were kind of talking about throughout today's tech talk. I know we've got some questions we'll be able to answer, but overall, when we're looking at a sealant, our general questions we would ask or that you would be thinking about is, what substrates are involved? So is it metal? Is it glass? Is it porous substrates? Do we need to talk about priming? Do we want to validate adhesion? What kind of condition am I applying it in? Am I worrying about staining? Moisture content, I don't even think we got into that. That's something else to consider when we're thinking about, did it just rain? Is moisture going to affect the installation? And it absolutely could affect installation. Frost on the substrate, weather, temperature. And then fire stopping is something that has specific UL ratings associated with that. So that would be a whole nother topic if we get into that. When we think about expansion and contraction, that's where we start to think about the thermographic or the thermal movement of our products or just the movement of products and what kind of capabilities do we need there. Same thing with our hardness and our modulus, things like that we'll talk to you about. Is cure time something you have as an issue, right? Like I mentioned the job at Disney, they had a specific cure time. They wanted to be able to open that up to foot traffic very quickly. So are we looking at quick curing sealants, or are we thinking there might be early movement caused by opening it up to foot traffic, or maybe in a precast application where we might get some movement early? And then a couple other things that we could talk about, right? What is your expectant life expectancy of this? Or do we need to talk about a technology comparison or a maintenance associated with that sealant technology? And then the very last one I put down there is cost, which we're certainly not going to get into. But I think a lot of times people start with cost. We really need to start with the performance and then obviously get to cost. shared a lot of information. We're going to answer questions, but if you need any more help, you have a question you want to ask, a topic you want to share, that's my contact information to help you out for sealants or any of the other scopes of work that we represent at Tremco.
Marcy,
So
that's
Terry,
great. What I realize now is that I need to stop using my kitchen and bath DAP around my windows.
well, you don't know. I know it says, I would say, let's look at the data sheet. Let's look at that data sheet and try to figure out, is
Frightening.
that the right product? So,
Great.
um,
Okay, so we're going to open it up to questions. So you can raise your hand if you want to come in and ask, or you can put it into the Q&A if you like, if you're a bit shy and you want me to read it. A couple of things that come to mind for me. So a lot of um, manufacturers now obviously put coatings on their window frames, door
yeah,
frames. Wondering if you have a list of compatible coatings,
yeah.
as opposed to having to test every one that a manufacturer uses.
So a couple things with that. So before we launch something, we will look, and we did with the Tremco 830 Plus, is we looked at a variety of different coatings. So we will do that. That is just part of our due diligence before launching a product. So we have that data, but we always like to then say, hey, can we do a quick field adhesion test? So we can do a general recommendation based on that specific window manufacturer and what coating we know it to be. Hey, yes, you're going to be good to go. We feel confident in it, but let's just verify that day's installation condition to make sure. So
Yep.
we definitely have that. We definitely can give you that data.
In partnership with that question is obviously everybody sees it. There's an awful lot of black and charcoal and very dark colors going on to window products out there. I'm wondering if you said that your products are available in colors. If you get into dark colors, do you have similar sort of low heat build properties to those materials?
So yeah, that's interesting, right? Because it's going to be affected, right? Different materials are going to be affected more so than others based on what color they are, right? So we can do a variety of different, and I think we look at it more for like a roof coating or a deck coating, right? Where we look at your solar reflective index and what kind of impact that can have on that material. So that would be something we could comment on and take a look at. But generally speaking, a silicone or different types of hybrid materials are less affected because of their chemistry than others. So that is definitely something we could look at based on technology. Good question.
Okay, great. So we've got Brent here. Brent's our commercial chapter chair, and he's asking, how would you approach evaluating different sealants between the brands?
So are you saying like all from one manufacturer, or you're saying I'm taking a variety of manufacturers and taking a look at them?
Yeah, both. Sorry, this is Brent here. And just sometimes like, say there's a low stock or, pricing differences. And we're saying, hey, well, is this actually an equivalent product between Tremco and another brand? How do you approach that?
Okay, good question as well. So we tend to do some of those comparisons ourselves as well, right? So we'll do it internally, right? So if you think about even Tremco, we've got, I don't know how many different silicone sealants, right? So there's a variety even there where you have a window of application, right? So it might be a high performance area, and then you have a middle range one. So it's almost like a good, better, best. So we can absolutely comment on that in terms of making sure that you're not over engineering the applications. You're getting what fits right. When we think about comparing it to other manufacturers, we absolutely do a comparison, right? So we will do a comparison, physical property comparison and things like that to help out as well. If you're used to using a certain manufacturer and you kind of from availability or you want to try something new, we can say this is comparable to that material. So that would be something we could provide as well.
Good, Brent.
And that goes back to like looking at physical properties, looking at, sometimes it's even handling, right? Some materials just might be easier to tool or easier to gun, depending on your application. So we can comment on all of that.
Great. So I want to just ask about the VOC item, the topic.
Sure.
So obviously VOCs are not great. We're trying to reduce them wherever we can. So what is it in the sealant that the VOC was required, and what did it do to that performance when it's lowered?
So it's a very interesting question, something we've been dealing with, right, for years now, right? So if you think about the solvents that were used before that we've had to change, we've had to look at either different levels of solvents. We've had to look at maybe even a hybrid approach to it from a solvent perspective, or look at ones that are exempt. So each solvent that's used in anything really that makes up that chemistry, there's certain properties. So it takes time for us to go through and look at the impact of making that change and how it affects performance. And that's why I give a lot of credibility to our research and development team and all the things that they have to do, because you could lower one thing here and then it could affect the gunability or the tooling. And that goes into the process, right? So when I talk about the sealant journey on one of those early slides, that's a long process, right? To go back. If you tell us, and that's why I think that change was announced maybe in 2021 that it was coming, because you need to give manufacturers time to do that, right? So we have to look at the contributing factors of each of the components and how they might affect each other in that formula. So it's a long process.
So
for sure.
I hate to suggest it, but there's a loophole, if I'm not mistaken, where if you're using, I think it's 425 milliliter packaging, you can still use the higher VOC. Now, would a user of the material, find a need to do that? Is the performance of the 830 plus as good as the higher VOC materials?
We are very excited with this 830 plus and its capabilities to really match and mimic what people loved about the original Tremco 830. So we're very excited about that. A blind test, right? That's why we go out and do field trials, handling trials, right? We're going out to the people that loved and got used to using something and don't want to change to something else, right? So we've gotten amazing feedback from that. And that's where, I could say it's just as good, but who am I, right? I like to call myself the theoretical installer, right? Because theoretically I'm installing a lot, but we need to go out. And that's why the field trial process, the handling process is so important when we think about the life and the journey of a sealant to really get that feedback. So we've got a winner here with this product. We're pretty excited about it.
So a user of the 830 with the higher VOC content shouldn't be concerned and try to find, a loophole using larger packaging and use the 830 plus if they were using the 830, and be confident that it's going to perform.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of those things where if you want, give us a call. We'd love to give you a sample so that you can then, of course, take that time to do your own comparison with it.
Great. Another question for Brent here. He says they use a lot of sealant between aluminum and concrete substrates. What product is suitable for that? Bit of a broad question, but is there a product that everybody's using? Because obviously aluminum to concrete is pretty common in the commercial world.
If you look at, I think as a manufacturer, each of our homes, we have two sealants. I bet we all do, right? And maybe more than that, but a silicone tends to be the most easy one when you think of dissimilar substrates because it has very low modulus. Well, not all of them. The one I'm talking about is Spectrum 1. That tends to be a go-to. So if you're thinking of like a low modulus silicone, that's going to be something that you can feel pretty confident with any type of metal and then a masonry substrate on the other side. What ends up getting complicated is if you start to look at the porosity of materials. Are you worried about a silicone and staining of that porous material? Then you want to go to something like we have another silicone called Spectrum 3. That's very low mod. We're not worried about staining with that material. So we're starting to look at that. Now, if you start to look at any type of metal with a masonry product and it's like on a floor, in a perimeter, on a parking garage where it might have chemicals or immersion, then I'm going to switch over to a sealant, a polyurethane sealant, like Dimonic 100. So it's really hard to say you can use this one everywhere. And that's where we like to have that conversation of saying if this, then that when we're talking about these
Yeah.
sealants.
So specific applications really require
It really does.
answers.
And,
Okay.
and that's why, you know, sitting early on in my career, I sat on our phone group and we got these calls, you know, I'd be like, okay,
Oh boy.
you got metal, and it's the best way to learn, I'll tell you.
I
But
bet,
you'll get
yeah.
the call, you know, okay, I've got metal and stones. And then you start to go through those questions I listed. You know, well, what kind of metal? You know, what kind of exposure? What kind of movement is the metal painted? You know, you can keep going and going and going, right, with that.
Okay, great. Question from Doug here. Mentioned that VOC change to 10. I don't know that formula. 10 weight percent. What's
10
the
weight
current?
percent.
The current allowable level that's being changed, and how drastic a change is that? So the new rules, you know, what's that doing?
I believe, and I hope someone will correct me if I'm wrong, I thought it was going from either 50 to 10 or from 25 to 10.
Okay. Either way, it's pretty significant.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, great.
And it's not new. In the States, we've had to do this with several products through the years. So it's just something, you know, that we've had to been able to adjust with.
Okay, sorry, I just got poor Jeff is still trying to figure out his technical issues. Jeff, we're gonna try and bring you in to ask your question. Isabel, are you able to open up Jeff's mic?
Yeah, so he should be able to talk.
I still see him muted. Okay, well, he tries to figure that out. I noticed that the C920, ASTM C920, it's actually referenced in NAFs as a requirement for your sealants. So anybody out there that's doing NAFs testing for their products, C920 or AMA 800 are both referenced as requirements for sealant testing. So you might want to make sure that you're doing that. One other thought I had, I've spent pretty much my entire life on the West Coast. Are there products, or is there a need for products to meet coastal applications where you've got high, you know, saltwater spray, somebody that's right on the water? Are there different products that meet those requirements, or are the products that you have that are like the 830 plus, for example, are they compatible to meeting a high saltwater spray, for example?
There is, as I'm sure you could imagine, a saltwater spray test that we can perform on different products. I'd have to check to see. I believe the 830 plus would be fine in those types of applications. Our basic products, our basic silicones, urethanes, and our hybrids have gone through a level of that as well. So I would just reach out to the manufacturer and talk to them about your condition. But we do get that question often.
Okay, great.
For coastal conditions. So yeah, typically it's fine. It'll be able to accept that type of exposure because it's intermittent. You know, it's more, the bigger questions we get more is like ponding or chemical exposure, things like that, containment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Jeff, were you able to get a mic working? It doesn't look like it. He still looks muted to me. Okay, that was a lot of info, Marcy. I really appreciate it. This session is being recorded, so it's going to be available on the FenCan website as well as on the Fenestration Canada YouTube channel fairly shortly. It'll probably take a couple of days. Oh, Jeff's messaging me again, so let's see if it doesn't seem to be working. Sorry, Jeff. I mean, you can type your question if you like, and I can slip it in at the last minute here. So yeah, this will be available for those that want to go back, because it was a lot of information.
It was a lot. I know.
A lot of great information.
I was excited.
Yeah,
I was excited to share it all. It was, you know, so.
No, fantastic. Sealants are such a critical component in what we do. It's good to have a better understanding of it. Okay, that's great. Last thoughts. Windor is coming up in Toronto, November 15th, 16th. Jeff is going to be doing a session on sealants there, and is going to have support from Jovan from Tremco, as well as a Dow representative. So we'll be able to hear more about sealants at that. Jeff is, boy, he's like a dog on a bone. Wants to share structural versus not. So he's talking about structural sealants and non-structural sealants. We got about a minute to go. Do you want to just do a bit of a cap on that?
Yeah. You know what, I touched on it very briefly, but there is specific requirements for structural sealants. So there is structural testing that we didn't even get into, which we can at a future date. But yes, if we're looking at anything that's deemed structural, and it will be deemed that way, think about two-sided, three-sided structural glazing, those kind of applications. We're going to do specific tests. They include adhesion tests to the glass, to the metal. They include compatibility testing to any type of gasket involved in that window pocket. But yes, if we're looking at anything structural, there is a specific requirement for testing. It's something we offer at Tremco. We need samples of your gaskets, your glass, and your metal, and we have those recommendations on our website.
Perfect. That's great. Okay, that's our time. Marcy, thank you so much. Great information. Really appreciate Tremco's support and participation with Fenestration Canada. And we'll see you at the next Tech Talks coming up soon. Watch your email. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
You bet. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.